Hello and most welcome to 1093, I gather it is. I will continue here with the tale of Heraclitus and see what we can advance to. I start again with 102 or D36. For souls psyche, it is death to become or born as water. For water is death to become earth. Out of earth water rises, is born. Out of water soul, psyche. In another example of ring composition, 102 ends where it began, with the word psyche. The shift from the plural psyche to the singular prevents the repetition from being too mechanical. But this shift is probably motivated by a difference in connotation. The plural form at the beginning suggests the soul or life breath of individual man, which, in popular belief, abandons the body at death and passes as a phantom to the world below. But the singular form points to psyche as a constituent of the natural order, like earth or water. You can compare that to the generic singular in 35d45. Heraclitus thus replaces the Homeric picture of the descent of human psyche into the underworld with his own account of the elemental way down to water and earth, after which the same stages are repeated in reverse order as a way up. As we have seen, the language of birth and death seems to allude here to a mystical cycle of rebirth, as in the Pythagorean doctrine. Only the transition downward to water and earth is described as death, as well as birth. The return upward is described only as a birth or becoming. Given the careful symmetry of this and similar fragments, the strong asymmetry here is scarcely accidental, insofar as the way up and down are one and the same. Every birth can also be described as a death. But there is another sense in which the way down is more truly the path of mortality, the quenching of fire, whereas the way up is in the same sense the path of life and rekindling. We thus have a foothold within Heraclitean psychophysics, for the dualism required by distinguished destiny for a noble death. There is an obvious parallel between the sequence of stages here and the passage from sea to earth and back again, described in 38 and 39, B30, 31A and B. What is new, beside the substitution of water for sea, is the description of these transitions in terms of death and birth, and the presence of Psyche at the beginning and end of the series. These 2 points are connected. For Heraclitus, everything is a form of life, and there can be no fundamental discontinuity between the realm of the Psyche and the realm of elemental transformation. 102 makes this clear, but by integrating the psyche within a series of physical transformations. What physical form does Heraclitus associate with the soul? 102 says, only the psyche passes into and reappears out of water. From this, it has been generally inferred, on the strength of the parallel with 38 to 39, that the psyche must be identified with the principle of fire, whose reversal are described in those fragments. The inference is surely a curious one, given the evidence before us. For fire vanishes into smoke and ashes, but not into water. And if fire can burst forth from many things, water is not one of them. What we expect to find emerging from and returning to water form is some type of vapor, steam, cloud or air, the product of water by evaporation and the source of rain or moisture by condensation. That this is what Heraclitus has in mind here is confirmed by the other texts that speak of psyche as alternatively moist and dry. For of course air, wind and vapor may in fact be either dry or humid, whereas this contrast makes no sense if applied to fire or flame. Hence, psyche changes to water by precipitation or condensing, just as water changes to earth by further condensation. The relevant parallel is to the series of elemental transformations, ascribed to Anaximenes and attested for Anaxagoras. Psyche here occupies the place of aer, wind and cloud in the standard sequence. By his substitution of soul for air, Heraclitus has reshaped the element physics of Milesian cosmology as a doctrine focused on the human principle of life and mortality. As a proxy for the elemental power of the atmosphere, Psyche in 102 corresponds somehow to the Prester or lightning storm of 38, which emerges from the sea in what appears to be an upward path of elemental change. This suggests not that Psyche and Prester are physically identical, but that there must be some analogy between the human soul and the flash of lightning in the sky. The force of this analogy will be brought out in 109. As was noted, most modern commentators have interpreted the parallel between 102 and 38 to 39 as showing that Heraclitus identified the soul with elemental fire. This mistake follows directly from the assumption that in both cases Heraclitus is expounding a theory of free and only free elemental forms. But this assumption, for which there is no ancient authority, is without any basis in the texts, except precisely as a misreading of 38 and 102, taking them both as the expression of a complete theory of elemental transformations. The misreading, which goes back as far as Zeller, is itself a result of an erroneous conception of Heraclitus as a prosaic cosmologist or physicos. How horrifying. Zeller took over this misconception from Aristotle and Theophrastus, but neither one committed the modern mistake of identifying Psyche as fire in Heraclitus. Aristotle described the soul as a vaporous exhalation, anathemiasis, which means something like smoke of steam or mist. The Theophrastian doxography in Diogenes is silent on this point, but in the remote echoes of this doxography in Aesius and Philo, the soul is defined respectively as anathemiasis and pneuma, breath and wind. So the Stoic attributed to Heraclitus the view that soul steams up or exhaled anathemiontai from moisture. The respectable ancient evidence is thus unanimous in confirming that the natural interpretation of 102, with the psyche understood as a kind of atmospheric vapor emerging from water. It is in fact the prevalent view in early thought in Greece as elsewhere that the soul or spirit of a man is a kind of vital breath, inhaled from birth or from the moment of creation in the case of Adam, and expired at death. Thus, an interlocutor of Socrates reports that most men will suppose that when the psyche leaves the body at death, it scattered like wind, pneuma, or smoke. It was just this commonplace view of the soul as an atmospheric substance like breath that was developed in quasi-scientific form in the school of Ionian natural philosophy from Anaximenes to Diogenes of Apollonia. The cyclical movement of 102 parallels the movement between light and darkness, waking and waking and sleeping, and in 90, as well as the cycle of generations in 95 and 97 to 98. It contains no hint of any higher psychic path such as will be suggested in 109 to 112. Further, very Heraclitean saying in 103, the way up and down is one and the same. 103 calls out for some context which it does not provide. I have placed it here as a comment on the cyclical destiny of the psyche, which is at the same time passage through higher and lower elemental forms. Both psychological and elemental interpretations of 103 are well entrenched in the ancient commentary, and there is no need to choose between them, since elements and psyche are so many different phases or aspects of a single reality, the kindling and the quenching of cosmic fire. There is still simpler, more literal interpretation proposed by Calogero and developed by Kirk, which takes the statement to mean only that every uphill path can equally well be described as downhill, depending upon where one is standing, just as if one is the same road that runs from Philadelphia to New York and from New York to Philadelphia. This literal reading of 103 is presupposed by both the psychological and elemental interpretation. In 104, we find one must quench violence, hybris, quicker than a blazing fire. 104 is the only fragment where fire is presented in negative terms, as a purely destructive force. This may simply reflect the fact that Heraclitus is exploiting the familiar literary conceit to quench hybris. But perhaps there is more at stake. In form, this fragment recalls two others. 538 D96, corpses are more to be thrown out than dung, and 30 D114. One must hold fast to what is shared by all, as the city holds to its law, and even more firmly. This common comparative pattern suggested that beyond the traditional warning against hybris, 104 is designed to express a more distinctly Heraclitean thought. As an enemy attack on the city wall threatens all the inhabitants of the city, so a house of fire threatens the whole neighborhood with destruction. And just as the defense of the civic law is seen in 515 to be as vital as the defense of the wall, so here the suppression of hybris, the suppression of that violence which disregards the law and endangers the community, is seen to be more urgent than the quenching of a fire raging out of control. In alluding to the dangerous power of fire, Heraclitus thus implicitly qualified his praise for the principle of war and conflict when it appears as wanton violence. Like strife, fire itself can become purely destructive if it threatens civic unity and the common interest of all. Toxinon Panton in 30. The former parallel to the aphorism on corpses suggested that there may also be some hidden connection between the fire of hybris and the destiny of the soul. This hint will be pursued in commentary on 105. It is hard to fight against passion, themos, for whatever it wants, it buys at the expense of the soul, psyche. As Reinhardt remarked, 105 seems to presuppose a customary phrase about buying something with the psyche, where the meaning is paying for it with one's life, as in the purchase of freedom of glory. How true! It is like we are diminishing the soul and we can even extinguish it. I mentioned earlier Edith, a friend of mine. She extinguished her soul by themos, by anger. So it disappears. So soul is not an existence that you always have. That is a thinking of the physicoi. That is a thinking of the Milesian. It's like we have a rucksack and it's constantly there. We can't lose it. It's always there with you. Heraclitus doesn't agree with that because he sees this as a construction coming from the Milesian. And he also points to that the Milesian bring many things that are of great importance. But this thing can actually be a great obstacle to understanding. And it's something that diminishes the soul, so it is in the end not an existing thing. And it's rather horrid to think about the soul as an existence. This is something I take a posture against more and more. It's a nullification of everything. We first learned that from Rodolphe Gachet, where he shows that existence of psyche, soul or thinking is the same as complete nullification, direct reflection with a mirror. This also shows why religion has been disabandoned today, for very good reasons, because a soul expounded like that is no soul any longer. It is just an existence, and just the very idea that everyone should have one to equal level. It is so typically Milesian. It's a thinking of the Ionian metaphysikoi. It never existed before. It's an invention. And I clearly see this. And this is something Heidegger more indirectly pointed to, but it's much clearer here in the book by Charles H. Kahn. Then I see it much clearly, and it's quite incredible how the warning, so to speak, or the paradox that Heraclitus showed so clearly, that try to avoid this trap, don't go into that. And we all did. We did not listen to Heraclitus. We ignored his wisdom, and we saw his writing as only paradoxes, when they were in fact pointing to the eternal soul and a higher being, both of which are today being utterly reduced to shrapnel, to nothing, because what is in existence is, if not just another version of nothing at all, zero. To break there, the bus is coming soon.